We are live across the internet on X, of course, on YouTube, on Rumble, on Facebook. How you guys doing today? Happy Monday. Welcome to the Liz Wheeler Show. I'm your host, Liz Wheeler. Who is behind the anti-ICE riots that are happening in Los Angeles right now? These riots, which we can see with our eyes, are violent riots. And yet CNN tells us that they are lawful protests with some unrest. A little reminiscent of how CNN described the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020 as fiery but mostly peaceful protests. But these aren't organic protests out in Los Angeles. I'll tell you that. It's not grassroots. It's not real. It's not what you're supposed to think it is. It is staged. In fact, what we're seeing play out before our very eyes is actually the definition of an invasion. What you're seeing in Los Angeles, the flames, the assault on cops, the impediment of law enforcement carrying out their duty, the lawful deportations of criminal aliens. This is the radical left's vanguard. You'll recognize that word. We've used that word a lot over the past couple of years because it is an inherently Marxist word. It is the moment Marxists use to push their plan into action, to begin to impose their communism on us. This is the left's vanguard. And the tactics they're using are the tactics of terrorism. We'll talk about why they're resorting to terrorism a little bit later in the show. But what we are watching before our very eyes, this is the revolution we have predicted for a long time. So what we're going to do today on the Liz Wheeler Show, there are a couple of things that America needs to understand today. We need to understand what's happening before our very eyes. We need to understand what to expect in the days and weeks to come because, again, this is not an organic protest. This is not a peaceful protest with a couple of agitators, fringe element radicals on the outside who are committing violence. This is the beginning. So what we're going to do on the show today is we are going to expose exactly who the mayor of Los Angeles is, Karen Bass. She's not some incompetent DEI hire as she was portrayed to be after the Los Angeles fires when she was overseas as her city was burning. That's not who Karen Bass is. We're going to dig into her background and her role in facilitating these violent riots, this vanguard. We're also going to talk about what groups, the money behind this protest, because again, it's not grassroots. It's not organic. It's not a bunch of citizens who just turned out on the streets to make their voices heard. This is a coordinated event. This was funded by radical leftist individuals and radical leftist groups, and we're going to unpack exactly what their agenda is in funding this protest. We're also going to show you some evidence of how these rioters actually planned ahead. They staged this protest in a way to make it look as though they just came out on the streets because of their outrage over the deportations, outrage over the Trump administration getting criminal aliens out of our neighborhoods. But the equipment that they brought with them betrays the truth, that this is a military operation that was planned far in advance. And then we're going to establish, analyze, evaluate exactly how the politicians are responding to this riot, because what the politicians are saying on both sides of the aisle tell you exactly what you need to know about what these politicians know about these violent riots. And of course, the role the mainstream media is playing in propagandizing this revolution is yet another reminder, not just that the mainstream media is compromised. You know that. I know that. Not just that they are propaganda. Again, you know that. I know that. But just how dangerous the mainstream media is. And it is a humbling reminder of just how much power the mainstream media still has. Listen, I warned before the November 2024 election that this type of violence in the streets would erupt again, and even more serious than it erupted in 2020 after the election. It didn't happen immediately. Why? Because it was strategically delayed. We talked about this right after the election. It was delayed because Kamala Harris drained the entire DNC war chest. In other words, there was no money to pay the rioters. Again, this is not grassroots. It's not organic. These are not simply citizens raising their voices in peaceful protests, exercising their First Amendment rights. This is a coordinated, orchestrated, violent riot, and those involved are being paid to do what they're doing. Kamala Harris couldn't drain the DNC war chest. They couldn't pay it off. So it was delayed till now, until June of 2025. Okay, so let's start with Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, who is an expert in political warfare. I don't say that lightly. I mean this quite literally. The mayor of Los Angeles, California, Karen Bass, is a political warlord. I'm going to show you exactly why in just a second. Today's episode is sponsored by Preborn. A recent bombshell report revealed that the abortion pill is quite literally 10 times more dangerous than the FDA claims it is, with 11% of women experiencing serious adverse effects. It's horrifying, actually. If you read this report, the abortion pill accounts for over 60% of abortions in our country, and with an average of over 1 million babies aborted annually in the US, that's 66,000 women who will be harmed by the abortion pill just this year. That is an astronomical number. This is what they call healthcare. Let me tell you what real healthcare looks like. Preborn network of clinics saved over 67,000 babies last year. Preborn not only provides for the physical and emotional needs of mothers, but also shares hope for the soul through God's love in the gospel. And once a woman sees her baby on that ultrasound screen and hears that baby's heartbeat, her baby's chance at life doubles. The mom is much more likely to choose life when her baby waves at her. One ultrasound saving that baby's life costs just $28. If you can contribute, please do. You are actively saving lives. And $140 helps rescue 5 precious babies. Any gift will help. All gifts are tax deductible. To donate, simply dial pound 250, say the keyword baby. That's pound 250, or you can visit preborn.com/Liz. That's preborn.com/Liz. Now, I know this challenge is not going to is not for everyone, but if this is for you, I ask you to consider this very prayerfully. Abortions, unfortunately, are continuing to rise in our country. Preborn is expanding their life affirming care in the darkest corners of our nation to help more hurting women, to save more babies. If you have the means, and whether you will or not, would you consider a leadership gift to save babies in a big way? Your tax-deductible donation of $15,000 will place a machine in a needy women's center, saving countless lives for years to come. Again, if you're able to do this, I challenge you. Now is the moment. These babies need you today. Visit preborn.com/Liz. Okay, I don't say this lightly. I don't speak in any kind of hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating when I accurately describe the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, as a political warlord. So when I say that, this is what I mean. Understand the reality of what you are seeing with your eyes, because part of the strategy of this riot is these politicians and their propagandists in the mainstream media are trying to gaslight you. Now, what is gaslighting? The definition of gaslighting is trying to make someone feel that they are crazy for what they believe, what they hear, or what they see. So when you face gaslighting from the mainstream media and from politicians, they're trying to convince you that you're crazy for seeing that there are violent riots that are taking place on the city of Los Angeles. They're telling you with their words, it's peaceful protests, it's lawful protests with a little unrest. This isn't truly violence that you're seeing. You're crazy to believe your own eyes. This is what the politicians are telling you, but it's important to understand the reality of what you're seeing. As you can see on the screen in front of you, these are cars that are on fire. The protesters in this video, they're waving Mexican flags, covered in tattoos, faces masked like the radical Antifa compatriots, like they're radical Antifa compatriots. You saw that a couple of protesters walk by and the pro-Hamas keffiyeh wrapped around their faces. They're pouring gasoline on car engines and setting those cars ablaze. And I would pose a question to you. It seems obvious, but it's important for us to establish, is this a peaceful protest? Is this lawful assembly? Is this an exercise of our First Amendment right to free speech? Are these citizens of the United States speaking out in dissent of a policy that they believe to be unjust? The answer to that is, of course, not. You can see here there are radical rioters who are assaulting law enforcement. They're throwing rocks at police cars. And this is just a tiny example. These are just 2 videos. There's a million more showing the violence that's unfolding. They're deliberately impeding the lawful deportation of criminal illegal aliens, and they don't care who they hurt in the process. They cut off, you can see here, these protesters stopped highways, interstate highways in California. You always have to ask what the trickle-down effect of blocking a highway is. Are you blocking someone who's trying to get to a hospital? Are you stopping law enforcement from preventing a rape or a domestic violence or a murder? When you shut down a highway in the United States, it is not merely a matter of inconveniencing the traffic. It can be a matter of life and death, and it ought to be treated as such. Again, one of the tactics the mainstream media and the left are engaging in, and they're trying to gaslight you. They're trying to show you videos and tell you that this is a lawful protest that just has a little bit of unrest. Well, you have eyes. You're smart. You're not stupid. You know what you're seeing, and what you're seeing is violence. And again, it's important to note the flags that you're seeing flying in the background, the Mexican flags. It's also important to note those kefias, the pro-Hamas kefias. We'll get to why those are important aspects of what's called a color revolution, which is what you're seeing here on the screen in just a moment. But let's talk about the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. Karen Bass was portrayed as kind of a dummy. She was portrayed as maybe even being a DEI hire when we had all of those wildfires burning down, the Palisades fire, for example, burning down the very wealthy neighborhoods outside of Los Angeles. She was overseas vacationing in some African country, and she was portrayed as just being out of touch. She was portrayed as being not that smart. She was portrayed as, well, she's a Black woman. Maybe she's a DEI hire, because it was so incredibly unbelievable that she would have been out of the country on vacation during this critical time, these wildfires destroying such a huge part of her city. Well, it turns out that's not actually an accurate portrayal of Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. She's not just a DEI hire. She's not just a dumbo. She's not a bimbo. She is, in fact, part of the establishment. And when I say part of the establishment, I mean part of the deep state, part of the swamp. In fact, she was one of the top officials in an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy. The acronym often used to refer to this is NED. The National Endowment for Democracy is an NGO, technically a non-governmental organization, but it's one of those non-governmental organizations that Mike Benz is famous for exposing because while it is technically classified as non-governmental, it got or gets all of its funding from the US government. Specifically, it got the majority of its funding from US aid. Yes, it's one of those organizations. So technically non-governmental, but gets all of its funding from USAID. So it is, in a sense, a government front group. In fact, its sole purpose, the National Endowment for Democracy, and they state this openly, this is not my accusation, its sole purpose is fomenting color revolutions abroad. What is a color revolution? Well, a color revolution is regime change. It is ostensibly toppling foreign governments with what appears to be an uprising of the citizens, a grassroots mob, if you will. But the thing about color revolutions is they're not actually usually grassroots. Usually around the world, these so-called color revolutions are staged and at least stoked and funded, if not completely fomented, by the United States government, by US aid, and by the NGOs, the ostensibly non-governmental organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, that are funded by US aid. Now, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, what does she have to do with the National Endowment for Democracy? Well, she served as a top-ranking official in the National Endowment for Democracy, thanks to Data Republican, who does incredible work. We can break this down exactly what her role was. Data Republican has a thread, which I'm going to bring up on the screen. It looks like Spencer brought it up on the screen already. Data Republican writes, who really is Karen Bass? Most people know her as the mayor of Los Angeles, and some remember her botched handling of this year's wildfire crisis, but there's a lot more beneath the surface. Karen Bass once served as vice chair of the National Endowment for Democracy, a U.S. government-funded NGO notorious for meddling in foreign governments under the banner of promoting democracy. Now, let's pause there for a second and remember that when the Democrats use the word democracy, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Mass deportations are a threat to democracy. They're not defining democracy the way that you and I define democracy. They're not defining democracy as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. They are defining democracy. They're redefining democracy, essentially. They're trying to co-opt the word to hide their true intent. But they, of course, are referring to what Mike Benz calls the blob, this uniparty blob of politicians and bureaucrats and, people like Karen Bass who profit from controlling the foreign, not just controlling U.S. foreign policy, but controlling other governments, coercing governments around the world into doing the U.S. government's bidding, whether this is the neocons, whether this is the the intel community, that kind of nasty, nasty business. It's actually the word that's most accurately used to describe it is political warfare. The National Endowment for Democracy specializes in political warfare. Political warfare. Again, as Data Republican says, the National Endowment for Democracy has been exposed repeatedly for funding color revolutions, pushing Western aligned NGOs, and helping topple governments that don't play ball with US interests. Bass was right in the middle of it. Now, I mentioned before the flags that we're seeing flying or being carried by these riders out in Los Angeles. You'll see most prominently the Mexican flag being carried. And of course, you might note the irony of these individuals who are protesting being deported back to Mexico, flying the Mexican flag as if they identify as being Mexican. There's a little bit of a contradiction there, but flags have always been a very important part of color revolutions. That's actually where the phrase color revolution derives its name. Color revolutions are these non-grassroots mobs of what appears to be citizens organically trying to topple a regime, when in fact they are usually paid actors who are trying to topple a regime because of the interests of somebody who is funding that mob. And yet, one of these symbols that they use to try to appear organic is flags. They use colored flags as symbols of their color revolutions, because when you are trying to portray something that's organic, trying to portray something that's grassroots, you need some kind of symbol that can be latched onto by other people. And then they're part of the group too. It's like, for example, during the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020, when everyone put that black square on their Instagram, that's a tactic of a color revolution, because then they have actively and successfully recruited whoever was stupid enough to put those black squares in their Instagram profiles as being part of that color revolution. In that case, the color that they chose was black, the black square. So these flags that we're seeing flown, those are just one indicator to us that this is not grassroots. This is not organic. This is a textbook, stereotypical tactic of a color revolution. And then, of course, we have Karen Bass's actual words when she defends what's happening in her own cities. Let's go ahead and play that video of Bass defending these riots. Here we go.
That's their First Amendment right. But people should also exercise that right peacefully. We do not want to play into the administration's hands. We're working with officials, we're organizing resources, but what we're seeing in Los Angeles is chaos that is provoked by the administration. When you raid Home Depot and workplaces, when you tear parents and children apart, and when you run armored caravans through our streets, you cause fear and you cause panic. And deploying federalized troops is a dangerous escalation, but we need to be real about this. This is about another agenda. It's not about public safety. There's clearly no plan, and there is clearly no policy. I want the people of Los Angeles to know that we stand with all Angelenos, no matter where you were born. The First Amendment right gives you the ability, again, to protest peacefully, but it does not give you the right to be violent, to create chaos, or to vandalize property, and that will not be tolerated. So I call on all Angelenos to continue expressing your right, your anger, your outrage, but to do it peacefully. And I just have to say that all of you were there Friday. Everybody knows what happened Friday. A workplace, several workplaces were targeted and raids took place. Now, in the beginning, the administration said they were just looking for dangerous felons, violent people. It's hard to say that that's what they found at a workplace or in a Home Depot parking lot. When this happens, it terrifies people. It sends a sense of fear and chaos in our city. And you well remember a few years ago in the last administration that kids were afraid to go to school, parents were afraid to go to work. This impacts all of our city.
Okay. So it's really important to understand or to break down exactly what Karen Bass said and then what's behind what she said, because the words that she chose were very specifically chosen. This is her area of expertise. Karen Bass is a political warlord. And I don't say that as an ad hominem. I am describing her area of expertise. Karen Bass's area of expertise is regime change. It is fomenting color revolutions to topple regimes. In this case, she is applying those same tactics here in the United States. She's applying her expertise with the intention of toppling Donald Trump. So what did she say? She is using the same strategy rhetorically that the left used after the January 6th Fedsurrection. You'll remember exactly what they did. The left immediately blamed Donald Trump. They said that his words were not just words, that his words were actually violence. You remember the phrase, Donald Trump incited an insurrection. He literally called for people to be peaceful. He literally told people who were becoming agitated, who had done some things that shouldn't have been done at the Capitol, to go home. But it didn't matter, because to the left, it was very important strategically at the time for them to set a new standard where if a Republican said something, used words that they didn't like, that they could label those words as violence. This is the exact same rhetoric that you're hearing from Karen Bass. She is blaming Donald Trump. And this is not a haphazard thing that she's doing. This is not her just trying to point a finger. This is setting up, teeing up, if you will, teeing it up so that when Democrats are in charge, at some time when it's convenient for them, they can somehow bring charges against Donald Trump, at least in the political arena, if not in the legal arena, because of this. Again, Karen Bass is an expert at what she does. And then also remember that communists don't like you. Communists hate you. Communists hate all of humanity, and they are willing like that to throw you under the bus if you have served your purpose. So when Karen Bass, who has essentially encouraged these violent riots in LA, is saying you are doing a disservice by committing violence, she's saying that just to virtue signal. She doesn't care if you get thrown in jail, because she's not going to be in jail. You have served your purpose in this vanguard to her revolution. She's also gaslighting you. Remember, when it comes to mass deportations, when it comes to criminal aliens in our country, when it comes to open borders and the invasion at our border, this is what we've been calling an 80-20 issue. That means at least 80% of the American people want our borders to be secured. At least 80% of the American people understand that we have an invasion happening at our southern border. At least 80% of the people want deportations of criminal aliens. This is not a split where half the country feels one way and half the country feels the other way. The vast majority of the entire country, Republican and Democrat, want our border to be secured. In fact, you can see this. CNN even admitted this. Back in 2017, approval ratings among American citizens for Donald Trump's immigration policy was wildly underwater. It was something like -21, -20. Obviously, illustrating that disapproval for Trump's immigration policy at that time outweighed approval. Well, since then, from 2017 until now, 2025, there has been over a 21-point shift. Now, the vast majority of people support President Trump's immigration policy. So it's not just a hypothetical, yeah, we got to secure the border. It's not just a hypothetical, yeah, we should deport criminal aliens. The majority of Americans support Donald Trump's immigration policy. And yet, what is Karen Bass doing? She's gaslighting you. She's trying to make you feel like you might be the weird one, that you're crazy for thinking, wait a second, I see violence in the streets. I don't want open borders. I want criminal aliens to be deported, and I want a secure border. And the law enforcement officials, the ICE agents that are arresting criminal aliens, aren't doing anything wrong. That's literally what we voted for Donald Trump to do. Yeah, we have this video. This is the CNN video. Go ahead and play that, Spencer.
Baseline numbers here. This is Trump's net approval rating on immigration. It's gone up like a rocket. Compare now versus 8 years ago during Trump's first term. Look at this. In his first term, Trump was way, way, way underwater at -21 points. But look at this. He's up over 20 points. Now, in the aggregate, he is in positive territory at +1 point on his net approval rating. Some other polls even have it a little bit higher than that. There is no issue on which Trump is doing so much better than he was in his first term, more than the issue of immigration. No wonder the Times has written up the way that he is. Trump is begging for a fight on this because he knows what he's doing so far is working with the American electorate.
Where does immigration rank on issues for him? How is he doing compared to others?
Yeah, so I think what's so important is it is his top issue.
It might be the only time that CNN perhaps accidentally told the truth. Donald Trump knows what he's doing because this is what the American people want. Listen, Data Republican, again, thanks to Data Republican for uncovering Karen Bass's nefarious expertise. It's important to understand that the portrayal, Karen Bass as this DEI hire, this bumbling mayor during the wildfires, that's not exactly accurate. She is a political warlord. She knows exactly what she's doing by fomenting and encouraging and excusing these violent riots and by trying to gaslight you and by using rhetoric against Donald Trump that, I mean, think about how this is juxtaposed. She literally said at the beginning of the clip, Karen Bass did, that the violence being committed by these rioters in Los Angeles is their First Amendment right. So she is redefining their violence as speech. And yet what she's doing to Donald Trump is she's saying his speech is violence. She is setting a standard where if you dissent from an open borders policy, you have suddenly become a criminal. And this is very, very intentional. Again, we've talked to Mike Benz on this show extensively about USAID. USAID is not an agency for international development. It's not an agency that supports democracy. It is a front of the CIA, and its purpose is to foment color revolutions. Then when we had Elon Musk and Doge uncovering what we suspected, like we knew, but they provided proof that USAID funded NGOs don't just target foreign governments. They have been weaponized against us. This is Karen Bass's goal. It's not just to topple the Trump administration, it's to topple you. Because that's what Donald Trump represents. He represents you. She was the vice chair in charge of this political warfare. And now look at her, condemning the lawful deportation of criminal aliens by ICE, fomenting the violent riots in Los Angeles. So who's paying for this? This is another important question, because Karen Bass might be one of the leaders of what's going on, at least in the political sense. But this kind of rioting, a color revolution, a revolution, a communist revolution, the vanguard of a communist revolution, this takes cash. Who's paying for it? Well, Data Republican is on this again. She says, we can bring this thread up too, Spencer. Hundreds took to the streets this weekend, blocking roads, attacking federal officers, even burning flags. But this wasn't spontaneous outrage. This was organized, funded, and coordinated. She said a number of NGOs have been implicated in this. Foremost is Coalition for Humane Immigration Rights, or CHIRLA. And the photos of signs show that they were printed by PSLWEB. That is, believe it or not, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Now, CHIRLA gets both private funding and government funding. Data Republican says 34 million of its reported 45 million in revenue are from government grants. So let's pause for just a second and ask ourselves, where does government money come from? What is government money? Well, government money comes from either two places. It is either printed or it is as a result of being of a tax. So it is either money that's been invented, which devalues our dollar if it's just printed, or it's coming right from your paycheck. So the vast majority, 3/4 of the amount of money that CHIRLA reported in revenue is from the government. It is either being printed, which devalues the value of your dollar, or it's coming straight from your paycheck. And if we scroll down a little bit on this thread, CHIRLA, in their most recent year, Data Republican writes, CHIRLA jumped from 12 million to 34 million in government grants. In other words, the Joe Biden administration knew exactly what they were doing. The Joe Biden administration knew exactly what they were funding. The Joe Biden administration knew exactly who they wanted to give money to in order to set up situations like these riots in California. Okay. So now let's go to the Party for Socialism and Liberation. It brands itself as a nonprofit. And what does it say on their Wikipedia page? Data Republican posts a screenshot that says the Party for Socialism and Liberation, PSL, is a communist political party in the United States. Okay, that's really all we need to read. The Party for Socialism and Liberation is a communist political party in the United States. It formed in 2004. 2004. And then Data Republican is an expert at following the money, tracing the backers of these different, whether it's riots or organizations, back to the origin so that we can figure out who exactly is in charge of this. And she says, finding financials is tricky, but I did find a wiki reference to Answer Coalition. Answer Coalition, that's the name of this group, is mentioned on their Wikipedia page to have significant financial overlap. And then the Wikipedia page says, Answer, also known as International Answer, and the Answer Coalition is a United States-based protest umbrella group of many anti-war and civil rights organizations. Okay, so it's a group that is specifically, it's almost like protesters for hire. Protesters for hire, that's exactly what it is. Well, that makes a little bit more sense. This so-called grassroots or of this organic First Amendment right, peaceful protest, lawful protest with some unrest. What we're seeing out in Los Angeles is actually a protest group for hire that was hired by a communist party in the United States. Data Republican says it's tough to find backings on either group as they do not have a nonprofit associated with them. Both claim to be funded entirely by members. And then she has two fairly apropos emojis, one of a cow and one of some cow poo. You can infer exactly what she means. And then she says, however, I did find a New York Post article claiming that both are funded by billionaire socialist Neville Singham. She goes, real nice guy, activist who became a billionaire by pushing Chinese propaganda worldwide. So he's a socialist. He made his money being a mouthpiece for communists. Singham also financed the People's Forum, giving it over $20 million. All three Singham-financed organizations were also heavily involved in the Columbia protests. Data Republican goes on to say the SEIUCA president got arrested. That, of course, is a union president. And she said, I researched SEIU's financials. They're mostly dues-backed. That's another organization behind these protests. Moving on to other organizations, it appears as though the Million Voters Project was involved in promoting this project. Here's the magic D word, democracy, on the Million Voter Project website. Million Voters Project gets their funding from a variety of grants, no taxpayer funding. She goes, that's the end of the deep search. Overall, my guess is if we had to finger a culprit behind all of this, it's Neville Singham. Neville Singham, a Chinese-linked tech tycoon who is paying for these violent riots out in Los Angeles. He's a socialist, and he made his money being a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party. So these are not organic. This is not real. This is not what you are told it is. And it's being paid for by communists, operated by communists, and the mouthpiece, the political mouthpiece for it is at least one politician. We'll get to the second politician involved here. First, there's Karen Bass, and then we'll get to the real villain. But Karen Bass was a high-ranking official in a NGO, the National Endowment for Democracy, which is just a USAID-funded color revolution organization. She specializes in political warfare. If you had to summarize exactly what we're seeing going on is Marxist violence, as I mentioned at the beginning. It's political warfare targeting you. And the term vanguard is the term that I want you to walk away from this episode understanding. Vanguard is the moment when all of the infrastructure, all of the institutions have been captured, and they are transitioning phases in their plot to subvert actual democracy, our republic, the United States of America that you know and love, and turning that into a communist hellscape. That's the moment we're at. The vanguard of that moment is the violence that must begin in order to have a domino effect that reaps chaos. And in the midst of that chaos, the breakdown of society is when the communists take over. Now, something important to remember, and again, I don't say this hyperbolically, I don't say this to foment the kind of hatred that they have for you, but these people hate you. And you know it because ABC News' Terry Moran literally said it this weekend. He accused, you remember Terry Moran. Terry Moran was the ABC, when I say journalist, LOL, the ABC personality who sat down with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and was arguing with Donald Trump about the MS-13 terrorist that's down in Sikot, down in El Salvador. And Terry Moran was saying it's not verified that he has the tattoo of MS-13 on his fingers. And Trump held up the papers and was like, yeah, it is. Have you not seen this photo? And then he said, I never even heard your name. That's why I allowed you in the Oval Office. That same Terry Moran accused Stephen Miller this weekend of being vile and brimming with hatred. This is what he posted. He has since deleted this. This is a screenshot because the internet is forever. He said, the thing about Stephen Miller is not that he is the brains behind Trumpism. Yes, he is one of the people who conceptualizes the impulses of the Trumpist movement and translates them into policy. But that's not what's interesting about Miller. It's not his brains, it's bile. Miller is a man who is richly endowed with the capacity for hatred. He is a world-class hater. You can see this just by looking at him, because you can see what his hatreds are, his spirit. You can see that his hatreds are his spiritual nourishment. He eats his hate. Trump is a world-class hater, but his hatred is only a means to an end, and that end is his own glorification. That's his spiritual nourishment. That was posted by a man who portrays himself being an objective journalism. And I think it's just a good reminder of exactly what the mainstream media is. The mainstream media is not just corrupt. They're not just biased. They're not just stupid. They're not just leftist. The mainstream media is completely compromised by the evil ideology that right now is rioting on the streets of Los Angeles. Stephen Miller is no such thing. Stephen Miller is motivated by his love for his country. Stephen Miller has been ringing the alarm and getting a lot of flack for it, by the way, for years. Long before those approval ratings of Donald Trump's immigration policy were above water, back when they were way underwater, which means it was really unpopular for Stephen Miller to be saying these things. He didn't say it because he was going to get the political kudos for it. He said it because of the strength of his conviction, warning that if we allowed our borders to be open, if we facilitated the invasion of our country with illegal aliens, criminals, then our country was facing an existential threat to everything that we are. Stephen Miller's been warning about this for a long time. And this is what he gets in return because, again, Terry Moran is not actually an individual in this example. Terry Moran embodies the mainstream media. Terry Moran is simply acting as a mouthpiece. This is what they think of you. They think that you are subhuman. And listen, what you're seeing out in Los Angeles is violent. You can believe your own eyes when you see it. And yet we have CNN, not just ABC, CNN telling you that the riots are lawful protests with some unrest. I know I've been saying that phrase a lot in this episode. This is where it comes from. Take a look at this.
So there's unrest. Let's start with there's protest, lawful protest, which is allowed in this country. There is some unrest generally dealt with by local law enforcement, and if there needs to be state support through state police, and sometimes even National Guard under a governor's authority. What is happening tonight is unprecedented. So there's
peaceful, lawful protests with some unrest, CNN tells us. Now, if this rings a bell in a distant hill, if you're like, wait a second, I've heard just such a phrase before, well, you absolutely have. In 2020, at the height of the Black Lives Matter riots, another CNN personality described the utter destruction that we saw in Minnesota as fiery but mostly peaceful protests, as quite literally flames were blazing behind him. Take a look at that.
Christine, Laura, what you're seeing behind me is one of multiple locations that have been burning in Kenosha, Wisconsin over the course of the night. A second night since Jacob Blake was seen shot in the back 7 times by a police officer. And what you are seeing now, these images came and come in stark contrast to what we saw over the course of the daytime hours in Kenosha and into the early evening, which were largely peaceful demonstrations in the face of law enforcement. It wasn't until night fell that things began to get a little bit more contentious. Things were thrown back and forth. Police started using some of those crowd dispersal tactics like tear gas,
Look
even
at that
playing
at the bottom of the
very
screen.
loud sounds
Fiery,
to push them out.
but mostly
and then
peaceful
what you were seeing, the
protests.
common theme that ties all
Fiery,
of this together
but
is an expression of anger and
peaceful
frustration
protests.
over what people feel like has become an all too familiar story playing out in places.
We can cut that right there. And that, of course, was Kenosha, Wisconsin. I said Minnesota before the clip, but that was after the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Fiery, but mostly peaceful protests. This is just another iteration of it out in Los Angeles. Lawful protests with some unrest. Yes, pouring gasoline on car engines, setting them on fire, throwing rocks at law enforcement, surrounding ICE facilities, blocking off highways, wearing the pro-Hamas, pro-terrorism keffiyeh, waving Mexican flags. That's all just what did CNN describe it as? Another CNN commentator just today and yesterday described these protests as peaceful, said that the people out there were just enjoying having fun watching burning cars. Take a look at this.
We are having an administration that's targeting peaceful protests, people that are there to protest. The president is sending the National Guard because he doesn't like the scenes. He doesn't like the scenes of people peacefully protesting.
Just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn. I think that's an ABC clip that an ABC journalist. It's hard to differentiate between the mainstream media at this point because they've all sold the souls. They're just utter propagandists. So here's the thing. This is not speculation on my part.
Large group of people, it could turn very volatile if you move law enforcement in there in the wrong way and turn what is just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn into a massive confrontation and altercation between officers and demonstrators.
Just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn, guys, and you thought it was violent. You believed your own eyes, you silly little American from some flyover state, you. Here's the proof. We have an individual wearing a keffiyeh, the pro-Hamas, pro-terrorism keffiyeh that has become the symbol of that terrorism, the symbol of the attack that was carried out against Israel on October 7th, the symbol that they actually want to carry out such an attack against you. It just started in Israel first. They're admitting that what's happening out, there it is on the screen. They're admitting that what's happening out in LA is terrorism, and they're calling America the enemy. Take a look.
So we all share the same, wherever you're at, we all have a common enemy. It is the same one. Everywhere you go, when you go down the street, there's the enemy. There's the enemy that works for the other enemy, who they all work under. So we all share the same common enemy. Everybody has the same enemy, from LA to Africa to Palestine to Vietnam. We all have the same enemy. That's one enemy. And it is not me, and it is not you, and it is not them. We are not the enemies of each other. They are the enemy. There's only one enemy, and we all have to work together in unison to fight this one enemy.
That's right. Capitalism,
the faster we learn that, the more we can grow as a people, and the quicker we can get to this revolution and overturn this and have real people leading this country.
That's right.
Does that give you chills? Because that's what's behind this protest out in LA. That's what's behind these violent riots. But of course, politicians, and I said we were going to mention another politician who was playing a pivotal role in facilitating these riots. But before we get to that politician, Kamala Harris felt the need to weigh in. And if this doesn't make you drop to your knees and thank Jesus that Kamala Harris did not win the election last year, then I don't know what will. Kamala Harris posted on her X account and said, "Los Angeles is my home. And like so many Americans, I am appalled at what we are witnessing on the streets of our city. Deploying the National Guard is a dangerous escalation meant to provoke chaos. In addition to the recent ICE raids in Southern California and across our nation, it is part of the Trump administration's cruel, calculated agenda to spread panic and division. This administration's actions are not about public safety. They're about stoking fear of a community demanding dignity and due process. Protest is a powerful tool, essential in the fight for justice. And as the LAPD mayor and governor have noted, demonstrations in defense of our immigrant neighbors have been overwhelmingly peaceful. I continue to support the millions of Americans who are standing up to protect our fundamental rights and freedoms." you will notice that not a single word written by former Vice President Kamala Harris condemns the violence. She doesn't condemn the assault on law enforcement officers. She doesn't condemn the burning of cars. She doesn't condemn throwing rocks at law enforcement vehicles. She doesn't condemn blocking highways. She doesn't condemn wearing pro-Hamas, pro-terrorism keffiyehs. None of that is condemned. It's encouraged. Because she is taking part in what Karen Bass is leading rhetorically, which is redefining the violence as speech. Remember when Kamala Harris back in 2020 posted that link on her, it was then Twitter, this was before X, posted the link to the Minnesota Freedom Fund. It was a bail fund for the protesters during Black Lives Matter when they were arrested. She posted a link helping crowdfund to get those criminals out of jail, and it ended up that same group ended up bailing out some lowlife who was at the very least accused of being a domestic abuser. That's Kamala Harris. That's who Kamala Harris is. Not one word of condemnation of the violence that we are seeing in Los Angeles. So here's the standard from the left. You assault cops, you light cars on fire, you loot stores. Then the Democrats and the media are totally fine with it. You're cool, dude. But if you peacefully walk through an open door in the Capitol because someone else moved the barrier and police aren't telling you to leave, and it happened to be January 6th, then you are a terrorist. You are an insurrectionist. Thankfully, Americans have woken up to the double standard. But Kamala Harris, fortunately, has no political power now. She has simply a podium to be stupid publicly, which she has always exercised to the greatest degree. But the other politician who's important here is Gavin Newsom. The governor of California is in the midst of trying to whitewash his reputation and portray himself as some chummy centrist. He sat down with Charlie Kirk. He sat down with Steve Bannon on his podcast where he just wants to talk with people on the right wing and understand them and have them understand him. And we'll come to some kind of compromise. Gavin Newsom is trying to get you to forget that he has presided over the destruction of California. Gavin Newsom is trying to make you forget that it was under his helm that California became a transgender sanctuary state where children, if they're suffering from gender dysphoria, if they were groomed into thinking, I'm a girl because I want to be a girl, even though I'm a boy, they can come to California. Parents will lose custody of those children, and those children will be medically transed. Gavin Newsom facilitated that. In Gavin Newsom's California, at this moment, boys can win in girls' sporting events and are. A.B. Hernandez just dominated girls' track and field, and Gavin Newsom said nothing about it. Gavin Newsom did nothing during the wildfires in California, in Los Angeles, even though with just a tiny bit of effort from him, he could have conducted forest care, gotten rid of dry brush, prevented those fires from spreading since it's a known fire hazard in California, that environment. But no, in the name of climate change and radical environmentalism, Gavin Newsom did nothing. That is the real Gavin Newsom. The real Gavin Newsom is looking at these violent riots in LA and not only trying to make it about himself, but he is engaging in the same type of political warfare that Karen Bass is. This is the same rhetorical tactic that Karen Bass. Let me bring this up and show you this on the screen. This is his post from earlier. He said, Donald Trump has manufactured a crisis and is inflaming conditions. If he can't solve it, we will. And then he says, to the bad actors, violent acts will not be tolerated. You will be arrested. You will be prosecuted. You are doing more than just damage to buildings and property. You are damaging the very foundation of our republic. Democracy is in the balance. Donald Trump is using you as an excuse to militarize a city and circumvent our democracy. He said to the many, many peaceful protesters, we want to keep you safe. We want you to exercise your fundamental rights. So Gavin Newsom, look at the structure of his statement, is doing the exact same thing that Karen Bass is doing. Karen Bass is leading. Gavin Newsom is following. Gavin Newsom is first defining Donald Trump's words as violence so that later anything that happens to Donald Trump, whether it's violence against him, whether it's political warfare against him, whether it's lawfare against him, that's justified because he committed violence against our democracy. And then he's lying, which is, of course, the hallmark of who Gavin Newsom is. He's saying violent acts will not be tolerated. You will be arrested. You will be prosecuted. Listen to me today, my friends. Watch Gavin Newsom very closely. How many of these rioters will Gavin Newsom prosecute? We will be watching. We will be waiting. We will be keeping tabs. We will be holding Gavin Newsom to account because Gavin Newsom's not going to arrest anybody. Gavin Newsom's not going to prosecute anybody. The very, very best we might see from Gavin Newsom is a slap on the wrist, no real penalty. Because Gavin Newsom doesn't believe what he wrote. He's trying to rebrand himself as a chummy centrist, but he's doing exactly the same thing that Karen Bass is. He is fomenting these riots because he hates Donald Trump, and he wants Donald Trump toppled because he hates you, and he doesn't care that you voted for Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has given permission to Tom Homan, his border czar, to arrest Gavin Newsom. This is what Donald Trump said this morning. Take a look.
Gavin Newsom he's daring Tom Homan to come and arrest him. Should he do it? I would do it if I were Tom. I think it's great. Gavin likes the publicity, but I think it would be a great thing. He's done a terrible job. Look, I like Gavin Newsom. He's a nice guy, but he's grossly incompetent. Everybody knows. All you have to do is look at the little railroad he's building. It's about 100 times over budget. We're putting a flagpole over there. Under budget. I always do under budget.
I would if I were Tom Homan, Donald Trump says. Listen, I do not endorse arresting your political opposition inappropriately, unjustly. I do not endorse lawfare when it's simply a tactic you use to try to hamstring your political opponent because you can't win in the court of public opinion. That's what the Democrats do to Donald Trump. They use lawfare as a tactic because they can't get people to vote for them. And so they're trying to stop Donald Trump in an unfair, unjust, illegal way. I don't think we should play by their rules. They don't set the standards. I'm not going to behave badly because they are. The difference is that Republicans that are being targeted by lawfare, like Donald Trump, haven't actually committed crimes. So it is illegal for the Democrats to use lawfare against Donald Trump. But Republicans could arrest and indict and charge Democrats because Democrats have actually committed crimes. Hillary Clinton committed a crime. Joe Biden committed a crime. James Comey committed a crime. All of these different Democrats committed a crime. So if Gavin Newsom has obstructed justice by impeding the enforcement of federal laws, if he has impeded the lawful deportation of criminal aliens in his state simply because he doesn't like the law, then he's violated a law. If he's violated a law, aren't the Democrats the ones that tell us that no one is above the law? If the Democrats truly believe that and Gavin Newsom has committed a crime, then yeah, Donald Trump's right. Arrest the guy. And you know Gavin Newsom's actually scared because he said, come and get me, tough guy. Come and get me, tough guy. Well, don't challenge Tom Homan because Tom Homan might just be the underrated hero of the Trump administration. He's been the one since day one of the Trump administration who's been carrying out Donald Trump's America First agenda. Listen, what you are seeing in the streets of Los Angeles, the left is unable. They cannot sell their evil ideology to you. You reject it. We reject it. We rejected Joe Biden. We reject the delusion that boys can be girls. We reject the poisonous idea that white people are inherently racist just because of the color of our skin. We reject the nonsense that securing our border is somehow bigoted. We reject the lie that America is tainted and therefore illegitimate, bad to its core. So the only recourse the left has is violence, destruction, and eventually tyrannical imposition of their communism, which, remember, is behind these riots, funding these riots, the motivation of these riots, and the goal of these riots, tyrannical imposition of that communism by force. That is what you're seeing in the city of Los Angeles. So when I say we are in the midst of an existential battle for our country, unfortunately, it's just the beginning. What we are seeing in Los Angeles is the vanguard of the revolution they admit they are staging. So encourage the Trump administration to continue their mass deportations, encourage President Trump to execute federal law that's on the books, encourage your member of Congress to stand strong and fund the mass deportations which are necessary for the continued existence, health, and prosperity of the country that you love. Because the people on the other side don't just hate the idea of America. They hate your family, and they hate you. All you have to do is listen to their own words, and they will tell you that. All right. I know we have some questions from the live chat about the Elon versus Trump feud that happened late last week. I know, I can't believe we didn't get a chance to talk about that yet because we weren't on air on Thursday and Friday last week. We are out of time for today. We will talk about that tomorrow. We'll talk about the big, beautiful bill. That's another point of contention for people on the right. But there's some important things to understand. I mean, the two things are tied together, obviously, the Elon versus Trump and the big, beautiful bill. We'll break that down tomorrow on the show. So make sure that you are subscribed. YouTube.com/Liz Wheeler. X.com/Liz_Wheeler, Spotify, search the Liz Wheeler Show, subscribe over there. We've got video over there. Also, there's a question in the live chat about FBI Director Kash Patel went on Joe Rogan's podcast. And of course, Joe Rogan asked him about Jeffrey Epstein and, the very viral moment that Kash Patel and his deputy director, Dan Bongino, said unequivocally, definitively that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Kash Patel's response again to Joe Rogan has again sparked backlash. And I do want to address that because I think that there's something that needs to be said. Something that needs to be said that will clear up a lot when it comes to what's happening behind the scenes at the FBI. Again, subscribe to the show, and we will get into all of that and more tomorrow on the Liz Wheeler Show. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is the Liz Wheeler Show.